And welcome to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're here every week, meeting interesting people and talking about topical issues. And today we got, well, maybe the head guy down in Oklahoma City at the Capitol who's in charge of the budget.
Well, the budget's the big topic, and therefore the state finance director and the state treasurer, the same guy, Scott Meacham, is going to be the person answering most of the questions and hopefully having a lot of information for us. He's agreed to come back and visit with us today, and we're looking forward to his information.
Less money available than they would like, but still a significant amount of money to be expended in this fiscal year. Scott Meacham today on The Verdict.
What if America had its own clean energy? Abundant and available for the next century or more, and possibly indefinitely. A true 21st century energy source would cut carbon emissions in half and do every living thing a world of good. That clean American energy exists. It's natural gas, and Chesapeake is its #1 explorer. For producing clean electricity and fueling our cars without imported oil, natural gas saves money and the environment. Proving the answer to this country's energy needs is right under our feet, and we're not running out. Clean, abundant, affordable, American natural gas. Doing a world of good for our communities, our economy, and our irreplaceable planet Earth.
Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate in Oklahoma City and Tulsa.
And welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Very pleased today to have once again the state treasurer, the Honorable Scott Meacham, back with us to talk about what's going on in his office and in the state of Oklahoma generally. He did his undergraduate, his master's, and his law work at the University of Oklahoma. He was a banker for a number of years, became state finance director, and then became state treasurer, and has been state treasurer since 2005. He's back for another visit with us. Scott, welcome, and thanks for coming.
Well, it's good to be here.
January is always an interesting time at the Capitol. How are things in the Treasury's office?
Well, you know, we're getting ready for yet another legislative session. That's why things get kind of interesting around the Capitol in January. We're getting all of our ducks in a row and getting bills ready and whatnot to get ready to go with another session.
And most people are wanting to know how much money is going to be available. Isn't that one of the key questions before they can lay out their spending priorities?
It is, and you know, we're going to experience something this year that really we haven't experienced in the state since 2003, and that is the legislature is going to actually have less money to spend this year than they have. We've gone through an unprecedented run of growing state revenues, but this year the legislature is going to look at about $300 million less that they're going to have to spend.
And percentage-wise, what's that amount?
It's about 4.4%. So it's for a state government that's not nearly as bad as like California and some states, but it's a significant amount.
Well, I guess you're generally pleased or displeased with the fact that you have to deal with a balanced budget in Oklahoma?
No, I think it's good. It serves us very well. You know, obviously you see what the federal government does. Whenever they get in trouble, they just print more money and we go deeper in debt. I think the balanced budget has served Oklahoma very well.
I'm sorry. I was just going to finish up that balanced budget thought. Is Oklahoma unique in that regard, or do many states have a balanced
It,
budget
it, is,
requirement?
it is much more prevalent among states. I mean, again, the federal government doesn't have it, but many states have balanced budget requirements.
California doesn't, apparently.
I don't believe so.
From a revenue standpoint, which areas are strong, which areas are weaker?
Well, I mean, as you might expect, the price of oil and gas started plummeting in around October. And so what we've seen is our collections from natural gas and gross production taxes on oil have fallen off dramatically and are projected to do so through next year. Sales tax have held in pretty well. Income tax, kind of a mixed bag. We're doing better in corporate collections than prior year, but we're starting to see some pullback in personal income tax collections.
How's the agriculture business?
Agriculture is kind of, you know, when you have a recession, a global recession, it tends to really hit commodities prices. So while we were doing very well going into October, when the bottom kind of fell out in September, October, then all commodities prices started getting hit. Oil, gas, wheat, cattle, cotton, you name it. And so agriculture was doing very well, but now they're suffering with low prices like other sectors are.
How is your revenue affected by real estate prices?
Not really so much. You know, other than real estate prices tend to be maybe an indicator of general economic activity, the state's revenue really is not directly dependent upon that.
We read that Governor Schwarzenegger from California is going to be putting in a bid for some federal funds for the bailout of his budget. And I suppose other states may be in serious trouble. I think Alaska's in trouble, and there are probably a lot of others that I don't know about. But would you expect Oklahoma to be making any pitch to Washington for any share of any kind of federal funds that had not been available before?
Well, we certainly think that if there is some sort of big federal stimulus package like they're talking about, that Oklahoma ought to get its fair share of it. I'd expect that those would probably come in like in the area of transportation and maybe the Medicaid program.
They're not going to do it based upon electoral college votes,
Let's hope not, since we don't have many. But I think, and obviously a case can be made in Oklahoma that they ought to be giving us more for a Medicaid program, because over the last several years they've pulled hundreds of millions of dollars out of our program. So, we'd like to get some of that money back.
Are there any areas of state revenue that in fact will stay the same or will grow, or are you going to see an across-the-board decline?
Well, I think that the Tax Commission is forecasting increases in corporate income taxes, I mentioned earlier, and sales taxes. I tell you what, sales taxes have been very, very resilient. We just went through this holiday season, and unlike the rest of the country that was down pretty significantly in holiday sales, Oklahoma was up. And our collections were up. So we're doing pretty well in sales tax collections. Again, the story in Oklahoma is so much better than the rest of the nation. I mean, we feel the global economic, crisis, obviously, like I mentioned earlier, in things like commodities prices and some large employers that are multinational employers or national employers pulling back on employment levels. But otherwise, Oklahoma's economy is doing pretty well.
What about the rest of the region? Texas, Arkansas, Kansas, those other states that are around us?
I think this part of the country is doing better. If you look at where the pain is mostly, it's on the coast. It's on the east and west coast and the upper Midwest, Ohio, Illinois, and those sorts of areas. We tend to are doing better in this part of the country. A lot of it, I think, is because we're more of a commodities-based economy here and not so much financial services or service sector driven in our economies. But, there's obviously some pain in various levels in various states, and Texas always has some challenges with their budget, but they do it every other year process, so you may not hear about it until their legislature starts to convene again for their next biennial session.
We've had a guest or two on recently, specifically the Lieutenant Governor, Jerry Askins, and Congresswoman Mary Fallin, that talked about the importance of the aerospace and aviation industry to Oklahoma. What's your take on the current state of that sector?
Well, clearly, part of what's helping us now is Oklahoma has been for so long so much of a commodities-based economy, agriculture and energy. And what aerospace does for us is it allows us to diversify. So we have a diversifier in there. And the area that we're in aerospace is not necessarily manufacturing, but more maintenance. And so when the economy goes down, it actually helps the maintenance part of the aerospace industry because people they're delaying purchases of new planes, so they're spending more on maintenance of existing planes. So we're doing very well in that sector, and that's a sector that I think we need to continue to feed and grow so it'll continue to be a diversifier for our economy.
But the number of state employees, do you think that's going to grow? What would your advice be to a legislator who came and looked at expanding government?
Yeah, I mean, probably not in Oklahoma. You know, you see a lot of studies that say, well, Oklahoma has a higher per capita number of state employees, but that's a little bit misleading because you almost have to look at state and local employees because different states divide the services differently between, you know, what's done at the city level, what's done at the county level, and what's done at the state level. And you really need to look at all of those, number one. The second thing is, if you're a lower personal income state, you tend to have more, you know, Medicaid programs, more crime problems, more things like that. So you tend to have a few more because of that. So I think it's a combination of those types of factors. But obviously with the dollars, we're not going to be able to add a lot of new state programs or new state employees.
To what extent are the problems that the state will experience, the minus 4.4%, for instance, does that trickle down, if you will, to the county and the city level?
Well, I think the cities and counties would say that the state really doesn't do much to help as it is. And probably that means the state's not going to be able to do much more in the future to help. I think as far as transportation funding, we've sort of gotten that taken out of our normal budget pot, and that does have an impact on the county and city levels. I don't think it's really going to be impacted by that. I think the real issue is going to be that people have gotten used to a certain level of service from state government, certain programs that maybe just hit a small portion of the population, but it's a very, you know, passionate portion of the population. And what's going to happen if we can't do some of those programs anymore? You know, I think that's going to be more the issue. People that maybe their child is afflicted with some certain kind of disease or you know, condition they were born with, that the state has traditionally provided some level of service, maybe we can't do as much in the future. And that's going to be the real issue is how we deal with those types of situations.
Let me jump in here and get us to a break. We're visiting with Scott Meacham, the state treasurer, and you're watching The Verdict. We'll be right back.
I'm Mike Larson. I'm an artist, and I am Chickasaw. We were fortunate enough to start doing more and more work with the Chickasaws, largely because of Bill Addertubby. We developed, with his help and with his graces, a series of paintings on the Chickasaw elders. I would interview them, I would do sketches, we would talk about their history, some of it phenomenal, and then we would come away from that, go home, and I would do paintings. First thing I will look at when I look at a person is their eyes. You look at their eyes, you look at their hands, you can tell everything you need to about a person. These people portrayed to me strength and character, filled with an integrity and a joy of life. The wonderful thing about it, aside from the paintings, is the way that it brought me back into the Chickasaw family. It has made me more Chickasaw. It has made me more Chickasaw than I ever thought I could be.
Home values are down in some states, but not in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's home values have increased 4.2% during the past 12 months. Unlike some states where home values have decreased as much as 20%. Good thing you're in Oklahoma. There may be real estate problems in some states, but there has never been a better time than now to buy or sell a home in Oklahoma. One of the most affordable states in the country, Oklahomans are buying and selling homes every day, and an Oklahoma Realtor can show you how. Good thing you're in Oklahoma.
Okiwani is an Indian name for a place where children play. When we obtained the camp, we found a lot of oil debris left in the woods. We saw a commercial about how the oil and natural gas industry cleans up old oil well sites. We called the OERB and they agreed to remove tons of concrete and steel. It didn't cost us a thing. Thousands of children have left their footprints on this land. Thanks to the oil and gas industry, they will for a long time to come.
And welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers, and we're visiting with the State Treasurer, Scott Meacham.
Scott, one thing we were talking about on the break that I wish you'd kind of advise our viewers about, you have told us that revenue's likely to be down about 4.4%, but there are some parts of state government that get their money no matter what. The funding of that part is mandatory, some is discretionary. Can you distinguish between, and I suppose the discretionary side is the one that would suffer when the revenue goes down. Can you tell us what areas that includes?
Sure. I mean, if you look at where the state spends its money, 88% of our budget goes to 12 big agencies. Over half goes to education. 53%, I believe, goes to education. Common education, higher education, our career tech system. So most people...
And that's because of some constitutional requirement or
no,
legislative?
That's just the way it is.
Historically.
I mean, yeah, that's
discretionary.
Yeah, I mean,
to a certain extent.
I mean, to a certain extent, except for we have a constitutional obligation to provide adequate funding for common schools and our higher ed system. So it's one of those areas that in part is mandatory because in fact it probably really is, but the legislature could in theory change the numbers, but then you know, parents are not going to be very happy.
Right, and teacher salaries are the results of negotiations, I assume, with labor unions to some extent?
To a certain extent, at a local level, certainly in big school districts like Oklahoma City, that's how it happens. In smaller districts, it tends to be more, you know, the state provides funding for a certain minimum salary scale, and they tend to pay that. In the bigger districts where the schools have to pay more to get the better teachers, it tends to be a little bit higher.
I see. So your revenue or your expenditures on education are not a function of negotiations with unions?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all. We'll provide a certain level for the minimum salary, and then anything paid above that
that's
is
not
up to the
dictated
district.
by federal government or a standard or reinforced by a court system that might not allow you to change it?
No,
Okay.
absolutely. Now, you know, there are certain things that are mandated by, like No Child Left Behind, federal law. So there are certain things, it gets to be this mix of things you must do because the federal government makes you do, and then things you choose to do. We have, for example, our correction system. Well, if we bring in less money, we can't let people out of prison, obviously. I mean, you can't do that. So although nobody's saying to you that that's a mandate, you do that, in fact, it is a mandate because you aren't going to let people out of the correction system.
If you do let them out, it'll be the last official act.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Then the next thing is you have in your whole human services area. And in that area, if you accept federal block grant money for like a Medicaid program or for different programs like that, then they put certain mandates on you of what you must do. Now there's some variability in that mandate. So we could pull it, whereas maybe the federal government says, you've got to cover everybody 100% of the federal poverty level or below, but we in fact cover maybe 133%. We could pull that down some. But again, then we're creating problems for our hospitals and things like that by not providing as much coverage. So it gets to be very difficult.
How far out does your vision go for state revenues? I mean, I know you're looking at 4.4% less this fiscal year. What's your prognosis for the upcoming year, the next year?
Well, I think it's going to get tougher and tougher to fund state government the way the citizens of this state have become used to it, okay? And a lot of it is because we have changed the composition of how we fund state government. If you remember, the last couple of years we passed the 2 largest income tax cuts in state's history. We took our top state income tax rate from 7% to eventually this year it's going to go down to 5.5%. What that does from a revenue pot standpoint is that means the slice that's income tax has gone down, but the slice that had to come from gross production then went up. So, long-term prognosis for commodities prices is much lower than it has been in the past. So we're looking at potentially a period of much less revenue because we're more reliant on that one piece of the pie.
How do you weigh the economic impact of lower gas prices? We can understand that there's less money coming into the state revenue, but that has to be good for consumers. And is there a benefit to that from your standpoint? I understand individuals can buy gas more cheaply and spend their money in other discretionary ways. But from your standpoint, is there an upside to lower gas prices?
Well, certainly it makes consumers happy, and there's more in consumers' pockets to spend on other discretionary spending. And so there is a positive economic benefit from that. If you're a state like Oklahoma that is such a natural resource rich state though, and you kind of stack everything up, the benefit from the higher prices is much greater than the economic benefit you get from the consumer, because we have royalty owners that are getting higher royalty checks that are going out and spending that and paying taxes on that. We have people in the industry that are being put to work in exploring and production of that resource, and so you have all that economic activity occurring. I mean, obviously there's some balance there. You don't want it so high that you know, it squeezes the consumer out, and where the consumer can't afford to pay for gas. But you know, it's a matter of getting the proper balance. But in general, the state of Oklahoma economically does better with higher commodities prices.
The taxes charged on gasoline that go to the state, those are based on the gallon and not per dollar. Is that right?
That's right. I mean,
and how does that affect the math?
Well, and, you know, and that was probably not the best way to do that. I mean, it probably should have been a long time ago done as a percent, like you do on a sales tax.
Right.
And people think it's that way, but it's really not.
It seems awkward to do it that way. But I was just wondering how that affects the bottom line.
I mean, what it does is it basically freezes you in on the revenues you're going to get from that at the state level.
Because there are so many cars and so many miles being driven.
Right. So we don't get the benefit of inflation. So although it costs more to maintain the roads because there's more people driving and, you know, gas prices are going up, the state didn't get as much money. So, and that's why we've had to come up with new ways to supplement our funding for transportation over the last few years.
What about your office? Do you envision any belt tightening at your office that you'd care to disclose to our viewers?
Well, we've made some significant cuts in our office. In fact, we hadn't got an increase in appropriations for I don't know how long, because what we've done is just figured out new ways to do things cheaper. I mean, we're always renegotiating contracts, and we've saved, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars through renegotiations of contracts and managing money better and outsourcing different services. I mean, we've actually shrunk in our employees at the state treasurer's office. And, you know, we can do that, but it's harder for some other agencies to do that. And that's one thing people don't see. You know, it's harder for a Department of Corrections to get rid of 10% of its workforce than it is the Treasurer's Office. Because Department of Corrections, that means prison guards, which creates safety issues. So, you know, when people say, well, we need to just do across-the-board cuts in state employees, they have to realize in some areas that actually creates more problems than it solves.
We assume that technology is allowing us to be more efficient every year on a perhaps a small incremental basis. But looking back over the time you've spent looking after the budget at the Capitol, both for the governor and in your current role, how have you seen technology make us more efficient? And are there ways we're getting more out of less?
I think we are. I mean, I think if you look at what's happened over the last few years, is the level of employment in most agencies has stayed the same or drifted down slightly. And the result is because technology has made us more efficient. We've gotten better doing the things we do. We're putting more applications, for example, on the internet. Let's use a perfect example. More people than ever this year will file their income tax via the internet, okay? That saves the tax commission money because they don't have to pay people to go in there and physically open those, you know, up and go through and do all the manual things they have to do, because they now have an electronic form that they can deal with. The more we can do things like that, and sometimes it means we got to spend a little money up front, but the more we can do those things, the more it saves us in the long run.
Less than a minute, Kent.
What are your future plans, personally?
I don't know. People keep talking about, you know, what I'm going to do or what I'm not going to do in the future, and I honestly don't know. You know, there's a lot of people out there saying, both parties, that I need to run for governor, and a lot of people probably saying he needs to go back home being a banker, but I don't know what I'm going to do yet, and you know, at the right time we'll make that decision.
What is the timeline? When do you think you'd have to make a decision?
I honestly don't have a timeline. I know obviously on the Democratic side, the race is getting pretty crowded right now, with a lot of prominent Democrats coming out saying they're going to run. You know, I don't feel any pressure to do that one way or the other. I think obviously by a summer timeline, you probably need to know. But I remember when Brad Henry decided to run for governor, everybody said he was getting in the race too late, and it was only about a year out when he decided he was going to run. So,
State Treasurer Scott Meacham, today's guest on The Verdict. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Scott.
Wonderful job. Kent and I'll be back with the final word after this.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, Each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers. We are wrapping up a show with State Treasurer Scott Meacham.
Scott's always generous with his time. He's been a stalwart out at the State Treasurer's Office since 2005 and doing a grand job. And in these times of economic tight budgets, it's good to hear from the person who's got to administer it and who's got to talk to the legislature about it. And I think our viewers are better informed for that reason. Besides, Scott's just a good guy.
He does a good job of taking what could be very complicated and laying it out as best he can to an audience that, or even I can understand exactly what he's talking about.
I started to say he needs to do that to get it through to you and me, and thank goodness our viewers benefit from that. Yeah, he'll have his hands full next year or two with the belt tightening, but it's in good hands.
Website information, you can visit more with Scott, ok.gov/treasure, and our website, theverdict.tv. We'll see you later.
The preceding program was produced exclusively for the Cox Channel.